Hey there, how's it guys? I'd like to make a quick video to have a look at the differences between the D.A.R.C.I and the Borealis for the purposes of high damage output to the bosses in the game. So we're talking Valkaur and Argos and Callus and these guys. I've long believed that the Borealis might actually be the best weapon for damage output to a boss. And obviously the D.A.R.C.I is a popular choice and a lot of players use it to great effect. A lot of my clan members use the D.A.R.C.I and I've used it myself as well, but I've had a bit of a disagreement, shall I say, with some of them that I think the Borealis might be better still. There are certain conditions, of course. So anyway, I thought let's put these guns head to head and let's look at the numbers and see if we can learn something. So I guess one of the first questions I need to answer is how exactly do you compare two weapons for this purpose? A popular metric would be to look at the DPS value, so the damage per second that each of these weapons can deal. And sure, if you're going to be standing there with infinite amount of ammo and just fire away, then yes, the gun with a higher DPS value would deal more damage over a given period of time. But I would argue that's perhaps not the best way to look at them, because that's not the typical scenario you find yourself in when you're dealing damage to a boss. So the issue here is if you're doing damage, you'll be standing inside a lunafaction rift and you'll be emptying your weapons ammo reserves as quickly as you can, after which you can go look for more power ammo and you'll have to set up a new lunafaction rift. But then it doesn't matter what damage per second your weapon deals. You need to go and find more ammo again and set up a new lunafaction rift. So it's really just that period of time that the lunafaction rift is open and that you're emptying your weapon that really counts. So as it happens, both of these weapons, you can empty them in roughly the same amount of time, and that also happens to be roughly the amount of time the lunafaction rift stays open. It also happens to be roughly the amount of time that you have for dealing damage in one phase. Like one damage plate on Callus, you have more or less 15 seconds or so to deal your damage. So it seems like a reasonable test then to set up a lunafaction rift, see how quickly you can empty your weapon and add up the total damage for that period of time, and then compare the two weapons that way. Right, so here I've used the Borealis to get a critical hit on one of these Centurions in the transfer room of the underbelly. The reason I came here was just it's a convenient place to get lots of these shielded adds, and I can use both weapons to test out the damage they do. Obviously, these numbers you're looking at are relative because that'll be different for other adds in the game. They'll definitely be different if you're shooting at Callus, not least because it's a function of how many skulls you got in the Shadow Room. But we're not going to get bogged down with all that details. So the point is, here I'm using the two weapons and shooting at the same adds to compare the damage they do in relative terms. So the number you're looking at here is 5,554 damage that I'm dealing on a Centurion. Now bear in mind, right here I'm using the void setting of the Borealis, and these Centurions have solar shields. So I'm not activating the perk of the Borealis that allows me to do double damage. So let's do that next and see what that gives us. Ooh, a tasty 11,107 damage. So that's just a nice doubling of the damage compared to when we didn't use the correct elemental type on the weapon. You'll notice on the left side of the screen there I've got the ionic return buff. So that shows me that I broke the solar shield with a solar shot from the Borealis, and that gives me double damage. So this number is what we're going to use for the Borealis. So let's have a look at the D.A.R.C.I next. And there it is, 6,700 damage. Obviously, first we had to break the shield before we could land the headshot and then get that value for the critical hit. But unlike the Borealis, breaking the shield doesn't affect the damage that we do. What does affect the damage we do is getting the personal assistant to kick in on this D.A.R.C.I, and that takes a fraction of a second once you've lined up your shot. But it's kind of hard not to get that. All you need to do is line up your shot nicely and you've got it. But anyway, so here's the value for the D.A.R.C.I that we'll be using, 6,700, which is slightly higher than the damage you get from the Borealis when you do not have the perk. but it's nothing near as high as the damage that you get from the Borealis with ionic return. But wait a minute, I can hear you say, that's not all there is to it. The DARCI has, first of all, a higher rate of fire, but also deeper ammo reserves. You get more rounds to fire with the DARCI than with the Borealis, and you're absolutely right. We'll have to compare those values as well. Let's set up a lunafaction rift and see how quickly we can empty both of these guns and get rid of all of the ammo in the magazine. There you can see 15.5 seconds is how long it takes us to empty all 19 rounds from the Borealis. Obviously, this is without reloading between magazines, which I think for the Borealis is every 5 shots. But we're in a lunafaction rift, so that's not necessary. And this is important because if you reload your Borealis, you lose that ionic return perk. So to use the Borealis effectively, you really have to fire it from inside a lunafaction rift. Let's have a look at the D.A.R.C.I then. And to empty all 23 rounds from the D.A.R.C.I takes us 10.5 seconds. So it's a few more rounds and it's a fair bit quicker. Now, where does that leave us then? Let's start with the D.A.R.C.I. If it deals 6,700 damage for every critical shot, and you have 23 bullets, then that tallies up to a total of 154,100 total damage that you can do. Let's divide that by the 10.5 seconds that it takes us to empty the magazine, and it leaves us with 14,676 damage per second. And for the Borealis, we deal 11,107 damage for every critical shot, and we have 19 bullets, and that adds up to a total of 211,033 total damage. Again, we can derive the DPS value by dividing that by 15.5 seconds, which is how long it takes us to empty the magazine, and that gives us a value of 13,615 DPS. Right then, that's a lot of babbling. So what's the take-home message here? It basically boils down to this. If you're interested in the amount of damage you can do per second, the DPS value, then the D.A.R.C.I edges out the Borealis with 14,676 versus the Borealis's 13,615. So that's a little under an 8% improvement. But like I said in the beginning, I don't believe the DPS value is really of that much use. I think it's an academic value. What you're really interested in is the total amount of whippers you can dish out. And in that regard, the D.A.R.C.I gives you 154,100 compared to the Borealis's 211,033, which is like a 37% improvement. So I honestly believe the Borealis is a better choice than the D.A.R.C.I for these specific scenarios where you're dealing high damage to a boss. If you're in a scenario where you have unlimited ammo and you can just keep firing, actually that's never going to happen. I guess when you have a scenario where you are not able to empty your entire magazine in the amount of time available to you, then the DPS value might be of more use, and then the D.A.R.C.I would be a better choice. But yeah, sorry for the monologue. I guess this answers my question. I hope it helps somebody else as well. Take care.